Hello friends! If you enjoy watching super hit movies and love English language films, then you're definitely going to enjoy this video. If you're visiting our channel for the first time, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Friends, in today's video, we'll be talking about a blockbuster movie, what the movie is about and where you can watch it. I'll be sharing all the interesting and lesser known facts related to this film. Along with that, I'll also inform you about the platform and satellite channel where the movie is available to watch. We'll dive deep into every major aspect of the film, including the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, and box office collection. In addition, we'll discuss the complete storyline of the movie and I'll give you a short, honest review of the film. Apart from this, we'll cover important facts about the storyline, the star cast, the performances of the actors, and which actor played which role in the film. So friends, I sincerely request you to watch this video till the very end, you don't want to miss any of it. Manila in the Claws of Light, Tagalog, Manila, Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag, is a 1975 Philippine neo-noir drama film directed by Lino Brocka from a screenplay written by Clodoaldo del Mundo Jr., based on the novel In the Claws of Brightness by Edgardo M. Reyes. The film stars Hilda Coronel, Lou Salvador, Jr., Tommy Abul, and in his film debut, Rafael Rocco, Jr. The film features cinematography by Mike De Leon and editing by brothers Edgardo and Ike Yarlego. It tells the story of Julio Madiaga, a young man from the province of Marinduque who arrives in Manila for a mission to find his lover Ligaya. While making plans for his mission, he has to survive the conditions in the capital city, contending with issues like crime and prostitution. It is one of the many films in the Philippines released during the Marcos era which lasted until the 1986 revolution, and in retrospect, one of the few films to gain international critical recognition. It is widely considered the greatest Philippine film of all time by voters, especially the local and international filmmakers and critics. Julio Madiaga is a young man from the island of Marinduque who arrives in Manila in 1970. From time to time, he passes by the corner of Ongpan and Misericordia, staring at a peculiar building from a distance. While pursuing his quest, he has to work to survive urban life. At first, Julio works in construction and at the site, he befriends co-worker Atong, who was hired some 5 weeks before. Another co-worker advises Julio that city life is quite difficult without the income to enjoy urban comforts. Julio begins to slowly observe the harsh reality of society, culminating in the accidental death of a worker. One day, Julio and Atong shop for clothes at a marketplace when a woman dressed in black and wearing sunglasses catches Julio's attention. She reminds him of Mrs. Cruz, the woman who brought his girlfriend Ligaya to Manila for schooling. Julio runs through the crowd to follow the woman and tries to approach her, but before he can say anything, the lady shrieks in distress. Julio flees to not make a scene, running back to Atong and leaving the marketplace with him. This is followed by other occasions of spotting Mrs. Cruz, leading Julio to discover that Ligaya was brought to Manila for prostitution. He continues encountering people in Manila including callboys, male prostitutes, and the relatives of co-workers, eventually reuniting with former workmate Paul, who supported him earlier and was a good friend. Julio eventually locates Ligaya, and she explains everything that has happened to her since leaving home. Julio plans with Ligaya to return to Marinduque with her 4-month-old baby. They agree to meet at Arranque Market, but she fails to appear at the appointed time. Despondent, Julio returns to Paul's home, where he's been staying. Paul informs him the next day that Ligaya died that night. She allegedly fell down a flight of stairs, but her bruising suggests she was killed by Atek, the man who rented her from Mrs. Cruz and kept her and their baby imprisoned. Enraged, Julio stalks Atek, whom he saw at Ligaya's funeral. The following night, Julio goes to Atek's house and kills him. Afterward, a mob pursues, corners and strikes the fearful Julio. A heavenly silhouette of Ligaya is shown as the film fades to white, then sky blue. Rafael Rocco, Jr. As Julio Madiaga, the 21-year-old protagonist who hails from Marinduque, wandering Manila in search of his lover, Ligaya. He starts the narrative as a patient, if naive, character, only to gradually transform into a weary and vengeful person. Hilda Coronel as Ligaya Paraiso, the betrothed of Julio. She was brought away to Manila with the thought of getting proper education, only to wind up getting entrapped in sexual slavery. Her name literally translates to Joyful Paradise. Lu Salvador, Jr. As Atong, a construction worker Julio befriends. Atong serves as Julio's guide to the plight of the working class, and in effect Manila, helping him cope with the unpleasantness of the city. He later gets wrongfully arrested and meets his demise at the hands of fellow inmates. Tommy Abul as Paul, a friend of Julio who also acts as his confidant. He serves as Julio's guide to the impoverished districts of Manila. Steadfast and loyal, Paul also offers his help and gives advice to Julio whenever needed. Jojo Abella as Bobby, a callboy Julio befriends. He serves as Julio's guide to the world of male prostitution. An attraction towards Julio is implied. Pio de Castro as Imo, a colleague of Julio from the construction site. He was initially poor at the start of the narrative, but has later improved his lifestyle. Juni Gamboa as Oming, another colleague of Julio from the construction site. Pancho Pelayo as Mr. Balajadaya, one of the antagonists of the story. He is the foreman of the construction site Julio worked in. Arrogant and selfish, he often treated his subordinates unfairly. Juling Bagabaldo as Mrs. Cruz, one of the antagonists of the story. An unsavory character who recruits unsuspecting, young provincial women to her prostitution ring. It was speculated by Julio that Mrs. Cruz may not even be her real name, but rather an alias. Tommy Yap as Atek, one of the antagonists of the story. He is an unscrupulous mestizo de Sangli who bought Ligaya from Mrs. Cruz's prostitution ring and made her his kept woman. The film is based on a story, Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag, lit. In the Claws of Brightness, written by Edgardo Reyes. It was originally serialized in Liwayway magazine from 1966 to 1967, and was later published into a novel. The adaptation into film originally started out life as a writing exercise. In 1970, Ateneo de Manila graduate Clodoaldo del Mundo, Jr. re-enrolled in his alma mater to take a short course in film writing. There, he wrote Peapod Artista, a screenplay he would later revisit in the 2000s. Del Mundo finished his script for Peapod Artista, which was supposed to be a major assignment, by the middle of the semester, earlier than what was expected. His professor, Nestor Torre, requested him to make another screenplay as way of filling in the extra time. Because he had just written an original screenplay, Del Mundo tried his hand at adapting a literary source for a change. He chose Reyes' story, already a novel by then, as the subject for his next assignment. After turning in the spec script, Del Mundo completed his course and relocated to the United States to continue his studies at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. Mike de Leon, grandson to Narcisa de Leon of LVN Pictures, had directed one short film and intended to expand his role in the film industry, namely as a producer. De Leon had just put up a new production company, Cinema Artists, and was in the process of seeking out projects. Eventually, De Leon remembered of Del Mundo's trial adaptation. Having been friends since their days at Ateneo de Manila, De Leon contacted Del Mundo with the idea of producing the latter's spec script. Del Mundo, who just returned from his 4-year course in Kansas, gave De Leon his blessing and agreed to further polish the screenplay. It was the right time, Del Mundo recalls. Citation needed. Lino Brocka, who had just received acclaim for his previous work, Tinambang Ka and Gunat Kulang, was approached by De Leon to direct the adaptation. Brocka took this as an opportunity to create a commentary about urban poverty amidst the Marcos dictatorship and included homosexual themes not present in the original source. Brocka understood the popular audience well, Del Mundo says. He suggested additions to the screenplay of The Claws of Light to make it more commercial. It was fun working with him, although he was quite emotional. The production title was eventually changed from Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag to Manila, Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag, lit translation, Manila in the Claws of Light, to emphasize on the setting of the story. An independent production, The Claws of Light was produced with a modest budget for cinema artists. Principal photography occurred in 1974. The film was shot on actual locations around the vicinity of Manila, to better capture the authenticity of the city. J. Ilagan, who had previously acted in Brocka's films, initially played the lead role of Julio Madiaga. Having already participated in several days of shooting, Ilagan was asked to drop out of the production when Brocka became dissatisfied with the performance. Upon viewing the dailies, Brocka was convinced that Ilagan, who had a very healthy appearance, did not meet his vision of Julio, a pitiful vagrant that waits in and around the urban gutters. The role was recast with newcomer Bimble Rocco in the part. Prior to this film, Rocco's only foray into acting was a relatively small role in Brocka's previous film, 3, 2, 1. For this film, he was credited under his real name of Rafael Rocco, Jr. The Claws of Light marked what would become the first lead role for Rocco. To play the love of Julio's life, Brocka chose Hilda Coronel. For the role of Ligaya Paraiso, Lou Salvador, Jr., a former matinee idol famous for playing angst-ridden romantic leads in LVN's teen rebel pictures, was cast against type as the wise and sympathetic Atong. Character actor Tommy Yap was cast as the rarely seen antagonist, Atek. Yap would later appear, albeit less significantly, in Brocka's In Siang, alongside Coronel. The majority of the actors that round out the film, such as Tommy Abul and Juni Gamboa, were veterans of both the stage and radio. Rotten Tomatoes, a review aggregator, reports that 100% of 5 surveyed critics gave the film a positive review. The average rating is 8.4/10. Manala Dargis of the New York Times made it a NYT Critics' Pick and wrote, "The movie's palpable, deeply lived-in realism is among its great attractions, largely because the film isn't just a story about a young Filipino everyman, but because it's also a de facto record of Manila in the 1970s. Ingku Kong of the Village Voice wrote, "The intimate proletarian melodrama The Claws of Light succeeds where so many political allegories fail. With ethical and emotional sophistication, it dramatizes the suffering of the disadvantaged with characters that feel individual yet archetypal." Meanwhile, Jose Capino, writing for the Criterion Collection, noted that the film was met with charges of anti-Chinese racism from reviewers. Keith Ulick of Time Out New York rated it 4/5 stars and wrote that it is widely, and understandably, considered one of the pinnacles of Filipino cinema. Alan Jones of Slant magazine rated it 4.5/5 stars and called the film a precursor to A Touch of Sin. In a retrospective essay reflecting on the film's enduring relevance nearly 50 years after its 1975 release, Paul Emmanuel Enicola of the Movie Buff described Manila in the Claws of Light as a searing indictment. Every institution, from labor to media to law enforcement, fails the characters. Their story isn't rare. It's ordinary. And that's what makes it devastating. The film won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Actor, and Best Supporting Actor at the 1976 FAMAS Awards. Manila is one of the few Filipino films that has been consistently placed among the world's top 100 films of all time. It is the only film from the Philippines that entered in the list of the book, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. It was shown as part of the Cannes Classics section of the 2013 Cannes Film Festival. A stage adaptation of the film was released in 2017, directed by Joel Lamanan. It was presented by Grand Leisure Corporation and features music by Von de Guzman, choreography by Douglas Nairez, and production design by June Flavier Pablo. The musical starred Armin Ferrer as Julio Madiaga, Sheila Valderrama Martinez as Ligaya Paraiso, with Lara Maig as alternate, Floyd Tina as Paul, Noel Reyes as Atong, Isel Santans as Perla, with Rita Daniela as alternate, Dulce as Mrs. Cruz, with Ima Castro as alternate. Manila in the Claws of Light was restored in 4K resolution in 2013. The restoration was performed by World Cinema Foundation and the Film Development Council of the Philippines at Cineteca de Bologna/El Imagine Retrovita Laboratory, in association with LVN, Cinema Artists Philippines and Mike de Leon. The restored film premiered at the 2013 Cannes Film Festival as part of the Cinema Classics section and was released in the Philippines on August 7, 2013. The restored film was released on DVD and Blu-ray as part of the Criterion Collection on June 12, 2018. Julio Madiaga, a Provinciano, arrives in Manila to search for his beloved, Ligaya. Julio Madiaga, a simple fisherman from the province, travels to Manila to find Ligaya, the woman he loves, who went away with a mysterious woman who promised her a better future in the city. When he arrives, he becomes immersed in the city lifestyle and gets involved with its inhabitants, experiencing extreme poverty, hard luck, and the overbearing need to grind for daily sustenance. While Julio relentlessly searches for Ligaya, the city changes him little by little, and he becomes like an animal doomed to live only for survival in a wild, inescapable jungle. Terrence 16. Julio Madiaga, Bimble Rocco, is a young man from the island of Marinduque who arrives in Manila in 1970. From time to time, he passes by the corner of Ongpan and Misericordia, staring at a peculiar building from a distance. While pursuing his quest, he has to work to survive urban life. At first, Julio works in construction and at the site, he befriends co-worker Atong, Lou Salvador Jr., who was hired some 5 weeks before. Another co-worker advises Julio that city life is quite difficult without the income to enjoy urban comforts. Julio begins to slowly observe the harsh reality of society, culminating in the accidental death of a worker. One day, Julio and Atong shop for clothes at a marketplace when a woman dressed in black and wearing sunglasses catches Julio's attention. She reminds him of Mrs. Cruz, the woman who brought his girlfriend Ligaya to Manila for schooling. Julio runs through the crowd to follow the woman and tries to approach her, but before he can say anything, the lady shrieks in distress. Julio flees to not make a scene, running back to Atong and leaving the marketplace with him. This is followed by other occasions of spotting Mrs. Cruz, leading Julio to discover that Ligaya was brought to Manila for prostitution. He continues encountering people in Manila including callboys, male prostitutes, and the relatives of co-workers, eventually reuniting with former workmate Paul, who supported him earlier and was a good friend. Julio eventually locates Ligaya, Hilda Coronel, and she explains everything that has happened to her since leaving home. Julio plans with Ligaya to return to Marinduque with her 4-month-old baby. They agree to meet at Errant Market, but she fails to appear at the appointed time. Despondent, Julio returns to Paul's home, where he's been staying. Paul informs him the next day that Ligaya died that night. She allegedly fell down a flight of stairs, but her bruising suggests she was killed by Atek, the man who rented her from Mrs. Cruz and kept her and their baby imprisoned. Enraged, Julio stalks Atek, whom he saw at Ligaya's funeral. The following night, Julio goes to Atek's house and kills him. Afterward, a mob pursues, corners and attacks the fearful Julio. A heavenly silhouette of Ligaya is shown as the film fades to white, then sky blue. I have to admit something rather embarrassing on my end. Being Filipino by roots, I haven't seen much Filipino cinema, and even more embarrassing is that I've only rushed out for Lav Diaz films. That's not to say Diaz is a bad filmmaker, but from the many Filipino filmmakers working today he was the only one I ever found myself familiar with, and he was the only priority I had from then. Although recently, I came back from a 3-week vacation in the Philippines, which soon got me to thinking that I should change my own viewing habits in the meantime. I was recommended Lino Brocka's Manila in the Claws of Light for quite some time already, and after hearing praises of it supposedly being the greatest Filipino film ever made, me having finally seen it now only has excitement fueled for what more there is to explore. Lino Brocka's film tells a story of poverty during the Marcos administration and in turn offers a scathing critique upon the society which came as a result of the poor economy, while at the same time never turning away from his trademark homosexual theme. Brocka was openly gay and always incorporated such themes into his work. Adapted from In the Claws of Brightness by Edgardo Reyes, the story revolves around the young Julio played by newcomer Lino Brocka, as he weaves from his poor background from Marindique to the big city of Manila in order to search for his long-lost love, Ligaya Paraiso, meaning joyful paradise, after she was supposedly brought away in order to supposedly get a proper education, only to find the naive young soul transform into something of power as he witnesses Manila's criminal underworld. Julio's character arc is one among many things that helps give Manila in the Claws of Light the power it carries, only to be aided more by a powerful performance from Lino Brocka, who was shot up to prominence after taking the lead role. Heading from an environment of one background to another and then lingering in another after seeing so much devastation coming abroad, everything here is ripe material for Lino Brocka to allow his social commentary to be as scathing as it is. It feels so much like an Italian neorealist picture. Perhaps in a way it could be the Philippines' answer to such films. Julio is a character defined by what the world around him has brought himself to, a perspective traumatized by the poor economy of his home and the seediness of what supposedly is a higher class structure. Romance is one thing that Manila in the Claws of Light can be taken for, but perhaps it is only a coating for more tragedies that are set to come forward. Julio's search for Ligaya soon brings him to discover the world of sex trafficking after it turns out Ligaya was brought into Manila in order to become a prostitute. There's a struggle that poverty endures as highlighted by Brocka in such a work, but at the same time, the critiques that are present at such malice towards the lower class as shown here allow for something more significant to come about, given as such struggles are still present in our world today. At the supposed Claws of Light, as the title highlights, it may be that there is a hint towards how the supposed brightness of a higher class turns out to be a trap for something much more dangerous at hand. Something that stood out most within the way Lino Brocka shows all of this happening in front of our eyes would be a specific corruption that runs not only in our protagonist Julio but all across Manila. It was clear enough through our rarely seen antagonist character Atek, a play on the attic, meaning cash, representing all the greed that floods the streets. Julio is representative of an everyman living within a poor economy, yet friendship is still bound amidst fellow construction worker Atong, who serves as his guide through the unpleasantness of the city. But perhaps in Julio himself, what is being represented is an entire economy that only goes down more and more if everything moves in the direction to which it does, and only allows for damage all throughout, especially with his change of character, starting a naive young slum boy to an angry revenge seeker. Had something about this film hit me more than anything, it would be the final shot, possibly the most haunting that I've witnessed in such a long while. Anger has taken its fullest form, and Julio realizes upon this moment where his shift in character has taken him, highlighting the tragedy all the more as we finish on a close-up shot of his terrified face. It is never clear what happens to him after that, but quite evidently, Lino Brocka was exposing a rooted anger as it gets more violent and uncontrollable. It could be the best way to describe Manila in the Claws of Light, though, a tragedy as defined by anger upon a poor economy's effect on society, just as the higher class is soon corrupted by their own power. It's incredible enough considering how much Lino Brocka decides to expose during the time in which the film had come out, but everything came clear with that final shot about why I can't let it leave my head. When I first watched Manila, in the Claws of Light, Manila, Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag in Filipino, in our class, I did not completely understand the dialogues between the characters, mostly due to the music or background noises being far louder than the voices. My teacher said that it was because of the speaker, not the film itself. Regardless, I paid little attention to the film, instead writing it off as another film trying to portray something deep but ends up stumbling in its own over-ambition. However, when I did some research on this film as a guide for this review, I was shocked to see its incredibly high reviews and is considered as the greatest Filipino film ever made. Additionally, it has the honor of being the only Philippine film included in the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. As a result, I decided to watch the film again with a better and clearer viewing experience, since I might have judged the film too harshly. Now that I've watched and fully understood it, I agree why Manila, in the Claws of Light deserves its tremendous praise and recognition. Manila, in the Claws of Light is a 1975 Filipino drama film directed by Lino Brocka that narrates the hardships of Julio Madiaga, played by Bimble Rocco, as he scours the city of Manila in search of his girlfriend Ligaya Paraiso, played by Hilda Coronel. Ligaya was brought to Manila from the province of Marinduque by a woman named Mrs. Cruz under the promise of education. However, as Julio spends more time in Manila, he slowly learns of the true intentions of Mrs. Cruz and the fate and location of Ligaya after seeing Mrs. Cruz frequent the trading company building of Autec, a mestizo de sangre, also known as a Chinese Filipino. Alongside his search for Ligaya, Julio also struggles to survive in the harsh conditions of Manila, initially working as a construction worker and earning extremely low income. He meets new people along his journey, all with their own ways of coping with the harsh reality of Manila. Atong, a fellow construction worker who befriends Julio and schools him about the conditions in Manila. Perla, Atong's sister who nurses their paralyzed father. Paul, Julio's friend from Marinduque, and now serves as his confidant and who also has a secret liking to Perla. Bobby, a call boy who teaches Julio about male prostitution and how it can support him financially, and many more who have minor roles. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Julio and Ligaya have their last talk before Ligaya leaves the province with Mrs. Cruz to Manila. A huge factor as to why the movie is so powerful is that each character's story is so central to the theme of the film. Characters with likable personalities are shown to undergo hardships in the city, while those who have it easy are portrayed as stubborn, abusive, and greedy. The film focuses on the unfair and unjust conditions in Manila and does not shy away with the realistic portrayal of these conditions. Atong was wrongfully arrested for a petty crime and was killed in prison. The neighborhood where Perla and her paralyzed father lives mysteriously burned down, killing the father and leaving Perla with nothing, causing her to go into prostitution in order to support herself. Benny, a fellow construction worker of Julio who wishes to be a hit singer in the future, is killed in a construction accident. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Benny is killed after accidentally falling to his death in a construction accident. The characters who suffers the most in the film are the protagonists Julio and Ligaya. Later in the movie, Julio was laid off in his construction job and is unable to support himself. He meets Bobby, a call boy, who convinces him into prostitution as a last-ditch source of income. He reluctantly agrees but discontinues this line of work after only one customer. Fortunately, Paul was kind enough to help Julio financially for some time. After Julio was finally able to find Ligaya, she discloses to him that she was actually brought into a prostitution ring under Autec, the mestizo de sangre from earlier. She added that Mrs. Cruz, which might only be an alias, only pretended to bring her to Manila for education. Julio learns that Ligaya had a baby, the father of whom was not disclosed, who is closely guarded, somewhat as a hostage, by a nanny under Autec's pay, and this is why she cannot leave Autec's building. Despite this, they both hatch up a plan to escape together with her baby back to Marinduque. However, Ligaya fails to arrive at the meeting place for their escape. Paul informs Julio the next day that Ligaya died due to her falling down the stairs inside Autec's building. Paul also adds that the accident might have resulted from a struggle with Autec, due to the presence of marks on her neck. Enraged, Julio storms into the building, confronts Autec near the entrance, and stabs him repeatedly to death. A mob of onlookers outside notices the bloody happening, concludes that Julio is a cold-blooded murderer, then chases him. They successfully corner him, they ready themselves to beat him up, and the film ends with a close-up of Julio's terrified face, screaming silently. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Julio weeps and his screams of terror are muted as the mob is about to beat him up, presumably to a brutal death, ending the film on a dark and horrific image. In most movies, if a protagonist encounters problems and hindrances, they find a way to overcome it and all goes resolved at the end. This film excels in doing exactly the opposite. The audiences root for Julio to be able to find Ligaya and escape together after everything they've went through, but that's not how reality works. Reality is unfair, and the film portrays that in a depressing manner. Ligaya is killed by her abusive master and Julio is presumably killed for taking his revenge on Ligaya's murderer. This depiction by the film may be influenced due to the era that this movie was produced. The film was shot in the 1970s and was released on 1975, during the time when martial law was still in effect nationwide. The Philippines was in a state of chaos during this period, with countless human abuses, incidences, and injustices, which may have had an impact on Brocka's direction of the film. The film also has lots of symbolism littered all throughout. The characters' names are one example. Julio's last name, Madiaga, sounds similar to Matiaga, which is persevering in Filipino, a trait that Julio has. Ligaya Paraiso's name translates to Joy Paradise, and her unfortunate demise in the film may be interpreted as the state of bliss and happiness being unfairly taken away from hard-working Filipinos. Additionally, there is a reason why the city of Manila was the chosen setting of this film. Back then, numerous people from provinces migrate into Manila to partake of the numerous avenues for income. However, what is not known is that it is hard to thrive in the city if you do not have the financial stability. Because of this, many provincianos end up becoming squatters, earning enough to support themselves but not enough to improve their lifestyles. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Julio unwillingly tries prostitution, desperate to have a source of income. The theme of prostitution is also very prominent in this film. This is because of the fact that a majority of women were mistreated during the 70s-80s in the Philippines. Numerous cases of abuse were left unheard, mostly due to the effect of martial law and the prevailing machismo climate. Additionally, because of the widespread poverty at the time, prostitution served as a way to earn income for both male and female. However, it can also be used illegally, as shown in the film. The prostitutes under their masters earn just enough to support themselves, but cannot earn any additional money to be able to escape their masters. In a technical aspect, the film also excels in using the cinematography to symbolize the characters' emotions and circumstances. Just by looking at the angle that a character is looking, you can already deduce the emotion they are feeling. The color and shadows are also utilized in order to show the state that these characters are in. Just by looking at these angles, you can already guess the emotions that Julio is experiencing at these scenes. Another technical aspect that I loved in this film is the usage of contrasts. For the film to show how unjust the conditions in Manila are, there are usually extremely opposite objects or scenarios that are shown in scenes, such as Ligaya's depressingly empty vigil beside someone else's vigil brimming with visitors and Julio's depressing sleep in a bright and bustling park. Top set of images, Julio rests in a park after being laid off from his only job, surrounded by exciting and colorful lights of buildings. Bottom set of images, a wake with lots of visitors is shown beside Ligaya's empty wake, showing a cruel reminder of isolation. In conclusion, I am immensely happy to be proven wrong about my initial thoughts of this movie. The movie was able to illustrate serious and deep topics without sensationalizing or being unnecessarily overdramatic. The characters feel natural and have their own personalities that affect each other in their own ways. The portrayal of events here resemble a real and tragic depiction of history, from the sad reality of provincianos who came to the city thinking it would be an excellent place to have a job, to the dark reality of prostitution and abuse. This film paints a reminder of what history felt for some people at that time and the suffering that they had to live through. It's a story of the injustice and cruelty of Philippine history, and this is the reason why I consider Manila, in the Claws of Light, to be one of the greatest Philippine films of all time. Lino Brocka's Manila in the Claws of Light is a solid film, but more a social document than effective drama. A dirty corner of the street. Late evening. Julio Madiaga's face in the lamplight. The vibrancy of his eyes is caught in desperation, a silhouette in the window above him. A woman arranges her hair. A memory from a past paradise flashes into frame. Madiaga had a girlfriend, once upon a time. Their paths diverged after a cruel woman took her away on a boat to the capital. She vanished shortly thereafter. He can only guess at her fate, but the city provides him with many educated guesses. The pimps who cajole him on the curb with their wares, prostitutes, often blank-faced, or simply faceless, suggest some sinister end. Already the city has battered him into destitution, and on the intersection of Misericordia and Ongpan, what he's come from the provincial town of his birth to find is barred behind a rectangle of light, which immobilizes him, brightens every twitch on his face, and discloses the answer to his question within a shadow, the claws of light. Indeed, illumination, in this story, is no comfort, and often is representative of some misery of either Madiaga or, more cogently, the city which consumes him. Manila in the Claws of Light draws strength from scenes like the one described above, when the plot stops to recontextualize the emotions it traffics in, interrupting what is essentially an over 2-hour-long document of despair. It is a delicate moment, full of longing, and Bimble Rocco gets much of the credit, for he possesses great sensitivity of expression, and the script makes no serious demands on him save for the kind of youthful naivete that is suitable for a Provinciano like Julio Madiaga. In a film without any bravura visuals, the only distinctive technique used is flashbacks edited to literally flash across the screen for a second or two, unique plot twists, or any truly interesting characters, specifically, characters whose potential are never capitalized on. Small moments like this make the long slog more bearable. The film's main lack is not so much unrelenting grimness as it is its refusal to go deeper. The simplicity of the story's logic doesn't help. Manila is a center of corruption and urban squalor, destroying innocence, punishing idealism, breeding mindless violence, etc. Chained as they are to this trajectory, the characters just suffer and are only rarely given a sense of life apart from their suffering. Take Madiaga, for example. His arc is a downward curve. The film begins with him having been in Manila for quite some time, homeless and unemployed. He is hired at a construction site and collapses from hunger on his first day. He commiserates with his co-workers, who are all poor and have, for the most part, resigned themselves to their fate. The only one who hasn't, a student named Imo, chides them for their lack of ambition. By the end, Imo is the only one to escape the drudgery of hard labor after nabbing an advertisement job which he promptly lords over his friends. Another worker is Benny, a carefree man who is content with his life as a laborer until a freak accident at the site kills him due to his carelessness. Then there's Atong, who takes Julio in, even letting him stay a night in his cramped house in the slums. They get caught in Julio's orbit for a time, discovering, along with the viewer, the reason Julio is in Manila, to find Ligaya, his hometown love, who was brought to Manila by a mysterious Mrs. Cruz for a supposed work opportunity. He was able to track Mrs. Cruz to a building owned by a Chinese man named Chuatek. However, after an effort to get inside was rebuffed, he's been stranded outside, waiting for any sign of Ligaya on the premises. The rest of the film follows Madiaga's travails in the city. It is one crushing disappointment after another. After being laid off at the construction site, Julio even has a brief stint as a male prostitute in the underground gay community of Manila, with the assistance of Bobby Reyes. Reyes is one of the film's potentially interesting characters, a young, handsome, relatively well-off callboy who, nevertheless, denies his homosexuality. Why Reyes so quickly attempts to entice Madiaga into his lifestyle after a chance encounter at a park is never made clear. It ends with Julio parting from Reyes immediately after his first time as a callboy goes awry. He reconnects with Paul, a friend he met at a previous job. When another work opportunity arises, they go to recruit Atong only to find out he was murdered after an altercation with the corrupt boss. Atong's sister, Perla, is left alone to take care of their paralyzed father, wounded after losing a battle over family territory to a Spanish businessman, but when Paul and Julio try to help her out, a fire burns their house to the ground, wounding the father even further and driving Perla to prostitution to eke out a living. Then, miraculously, Julio finally discovers Ligaya at a church. They sleep together, and Ligaya reveals that Mrs. Cruz is a sex trafficker who travels the Filipino countryside abducting young girls like Ligaya with a scam story about working in the city to send money back home only to be sold into sex slavery. Any resistance is met with the threat of forced morphine addiction. The two plan an escape back to their hometown with Ligaya's child, sired by Chuatek, who confines her to their home on pain of death, but Ligaya fails to show up to the appointed location. He is crestfallen, but Paul later informs him that she was killed by Chuatek when he found out about their plan. They attend Ligaya's funeral, and afterwards, enraged, Julio goes to Chuatek's home and stabs him to death. This is done in plain view, however, so a mob quickly forms and corners Julio in an alley. Manila in the Claws of Light's closing scene is a close-up of Julio's screaming, tear-stricken face as the citizenry rushes to deal out death. This is a puzzling choice, despite how Brocka, and Clodoaldo del Mundo, Jr., who adapted the screenplay from a novel by Edgardo M. Reyes, sets the finale up. Several moments of a sudden urge for violence overtaking Julio are interspersed throughout the film, characterized by frenetic camera movements focusing in on his widened eyes and shaking fists. The idea is that the corruption of the city, dirty cops, sex trafficking, capitalism run riot slowly creeps under his skin until he is forced to retaliate, violently killing the man who murdered Ligaya and faced zero legal repercussion. At the same time, Julio is portrayed as a very soft, vulnerable person seen playing with children and small animals, easily folding when his wages are withheld by his boss, getting completely manhandled when a cop abuses him on the street. That these aspects of Julio are forced together without a smooth transition from one state to the next, meek country boy to violent murderer, makes Manila in the Claws of Light more of a parable than the gritty, realistic crime drama it is often touted as being. One never gets a look into Julio's psyche as this litany of suffering persists, or any character's psyche, for that matter. They exist to be oppressed, and to writhe under their oppression until it becomes too much, and they lash out only to be crushed by forces greater than they comprehend. Atong speaks out against their boss's corruption and is assassinated in jail, as a result. Ligaya wishes to help her poor provincial family out financially and is made a sex slave. Julio simply wants to find his girlfriend. His desire is met with abuse, potential sex work, and finally, death. Etc. Ligaya's full name, in fact, translates to something like beautiful paradise. This, paired with the idyllically framed flashbacks to Julio's childhood home, adds to the film's parabolic nature. It's a moral warning against degradation, which seems to stem from the urban grime represented by Manila, as opposed to the pastoral beauty of the province. When Julio wanders in the city at night after losing the construction job, neon signs of global corporations flare behind his head as another example of Light's malevolence, and the boot of Western hegemony, which looms in the shadows as the film's smaller corruptions take their course. It's a stale moralism, though, and with little attempt on the part of the filmmakers to offset the monotonous darkness, such moralism comes across as lecturing and, worst of all, dull. On a brighter note, the performances are uniformly solid. Again, Bimble Rocco's Provinciano naivete is believable, even though one senses the spectre of plot convenience when he commits acts of utter stupidity, like assaulting Mrs. Cruz in broad daylight. Hilda Coronel, as Ligaya, is quite good, especially in her sad monologue to Julio after lovemaking, although this, as well as Perla's breakdown earlier in the film, is yet another straightforward entry of suffering, with both treated a tad too melodramatically. Her best moment is when Julio confronts her in the church, and they lock eyes for the first time outside of Julio's reminiscences. It's the sort of acting done with the minutest of details, as there's no visible double-taking, and she lets the shock hang on that small silence between recognition and response. Jojo Abella as Reyes is good, with the episode involving the callboys of Manila injecting much-needed levity to the proceedings, although I struggle to see why it was included, since it has little meaningful impact on Julio. Brocka thought it would add to the film's realistic nature, and insofar as it sheds light on the existence of Manila's underground gay community, this is correct, but does it add to the core drama of his story? I would say no, although I suspect Brocka, as a gay man, felt some empathy for these characters. For what it's worth, it shows, since the subplot is largely free of any cheap luridness a less aware director might choose to engage in. There's one scene, though, that gives insight into the psyches of these sufferers. It's a slim look, just a peek, really, and it happens right before Paul breaks the news of Ligaya's death to Julio. They're eating at a favorite restaurant of Paul's. He dances around the issue for a moment, and then, seemingly out of nowhere, tells Julio about the fakirs in India, who walk on burning coals without feeling pain. He challenges Julio. "Paul, think you could do that? Think you could put out that cigarette in your palm?" Julio: "I'd get burned for sure." Paul: "Put it out in mine." Julio: "Just one beer and you're already drunk." Paul: "Come on. Go ahead." Julio: "Forget it." Paul: "If you won't, then I will." He extinguishes the stub on his palm. Tommy Abdul, as Paul, plays it low-key, letting the pain simmer underneath his expression, as his friend watches in disturbed fascination. Why does he do this? Perhaps, Christ-like, Paul wants to take some of Julio's pain on himself? Does he want to steal Julio in preparation for what's coming? Or is Paul put off by the total passivity Julio has displayed throughout the film, letting both fortune and misfortune crash upon him at will, and seeks to shock him into some emotion? Why do any of these long sufferers do what they do? Regretful, void of aspiration, they slave away under an oppressor's grip. The land they occupy resembles hell, with no end in sight to their punishments. Like those processions in which scores of penitents flog themselves in religious ecstasy, there must be some self-compulsion to their torture, withholding them from Imo's ambition, however tawdry, and rendering them choice targets for those above them. In the midst of total despair, how could there not be? Only Julio Madiaga seems attached to something transcendent, haunted by memories more luminous than anything else in the film. For this, he is dealt with, accordingly. It is a bleak end, and hardly deserving. But ask yourself, so clearly trapped between shadow and light, Ligaya's enshrouded face as absent of a smile as it was in life, was his doom, in the wake of such a sequence of events, ever in question? Of all making it in the big city sorts of movies, Lino Brocka's Manila in the Claws of Light, 1975, is among the bleakest. One of several films the activist and formerly commercially minded filmmaker directed in the 1970s to realistically depict poverty and struggle under the era's president, Ferdinand Marcos, who subjected the country's movies to strict censorship that forced anything resembling critique to be oblique. The 1970 set film's narrative is most of all preoccupied with a mystery. Ligaya, Hilda Coronel, the girlfriend of a scrawny 21-year-old named Julio, Bimble Rocco, has absconded from their shared home of Marinduque in pursuit of a better life. It's specifically one that will supposedly be brought from a factory job and higher education opportunity offered by an enigmatic woman, known only as Mrs. Cruz, Juling Bagabaldo, who visits the province one afternoon. She convinces the families of 3 women, including Ligaya's, to come back with her to the capital city. It seems too good to be true, and it'll be confirmed, eventually, that it is. Ligaya wrote back home a few times with vague missives. A suspicious drop-off prompts Julio, who'd been making a living as a fisherman, to come to Manila to track her down. Manila in the Claws of Light begins a few months into his search, during which he's spent the majority of his time, when not finding here and there construction gigs, standing outside the ostensible textile factory where Ligaya had been promised work. It's a monotonous existence made harsher by the conditions with which he and his fellow construction workers have to contend. Bosses take a good chunk out of an already meager day's pay. And work sites are so shoddily set up no one is given hard hats or other appropriate attire to protect themselves that it's not uncommon for someone to be killed on the job, like one young man with pop singer aspirations whose lethal fall one afternoon is framed by the men's boss as nothing more than a to-be-ignored distraction his friends and colleagues are using as an excuse to not continue with their shift's back-breaking work. Manila in the Claws of Light's early scenes are indicative of the moonlessness of the film to come. They also feature some of its most moving moments. In a life where neither the government nor employers can be relied on to act in good faith, Julio's peers are the first to help him in moments of need. They hand over a sandwich after he passes out during his first shift, which he starts after not eating anything for more than a day, and they offer him a place to stay when he admits to not having one. The movie is mostly set in Manila's spread of shanty towns. Brocka solicitously considers the financial desperation inside, and the intrapopulation solidarity that can emerge when no one can be counted on besides each other. Finding the construction work from which Julio has barely been able to save money is precarious. He will, mid-movie, by happenstance meet a man, Bobby, Jojo Abella, who does sex work and invites Julio to join the stable of which he and some other call boys are a part. Julio hesitantly goes through with servicing a client. Though the money is far better than what he'd made doing the work in which he has more experience, the professional pivot for him is, as a heterosexual man, too uncomfortable to continue gritting his teeth through. The movie is forward-thinking in its sex work is work characterization, and it's interesting, too. The subtle way male versus female autonomy in the profession is underscored, though that section of the film is also one you wish was shaded in more. There's a reason why Julio's eventual distancing of himself from sex work feels abrupt. Brocka had apparently originally shot a succession of thematically aligned scenes an evening in a gay bar, shot down flirtations from Bobby but excised them from the final cut, the film's subsequent restoration efforts not including those moments, either. Some have taken issue with gay sex work's rock-bottom framing. I see it less that way, partly because Brocka had been, a few years earlier, responsible for making a sensitive movie about homosexuality when few were doing that sort of thing, and more broadly as an italicizing that the more financially desperate you are in a society parched of opportunity, the likelier you are to involve yourself with what you wouldn't otherwise. Julio and Ligaya's relationship, as it's represented in the film, mostly takes place in quick, but no less emotionally vivid, flashbacks in Marinduque. They're photographed by CO producer and cinematographer Mike de Leon with a peaceful glitteriness that makes the ache Julio feels for the comparatively conflict-free past tangible. Most of what we see there finds the lovers in front of the sun-reflecting ocean, whose visual endlessness and which must be journeyed through in order to reach Manila confers an optimism the movie's increasingly depressing circumstances have a way of recasting as cruel and taunting the more often Julio daydreams about it in purgatorial Manila. Manila in the Claws of Light's dramatic success hinges on Julio and Ligaya's reunion, which only seems less likely to happen the worse things get. It's a shock when it does. It also provides no relief for the sweaty malaise preceding it, given what Ligaya will reveal about her time in Manila in a frantic, anguished monologue delivered by an excellent coronel. She next worked with Brocka on the gutting 1976 revenge film In Siang, in which she has a meteor part. Working from a screenplay by Clodoaldo del Mundo Jr. Itself an adaptation of some serialized short stories by Edgardo M. Reyes that were published in the Tagalog language magazine Liwayway. Brocka allows us to feel, like Julio, a flicker of hope while poised for its extinguishing. Even if Ligaya can break free of her particular waking nightmare, she and Julio will still be subjected to the difficulties of surviving in a city one character observes is only existentially tenable if you have plenty of money with which to cushion yourself. Manila in the Claws of Light might feel more miserable for the sake of it if realities like Julio and Ligaya's weren't common under Marcos's rule. Whether or not its misery seems excessive is, in any case, a courageous rendering, since Marcos so adamantly barred movies from being critical of his rule and, as a result, saw Filipino cinema during his reign be mostly defined by apolitical, escapist fare. That Brocka was nonetheless able to get his decidedly if aslantly unflattering to Marcos film released and have it be met with international praise remains impressive, though that ability to skirt around restrictions wouldn't remain the case for long. It additionally upholds the never-ending importance of artistic bravery in the face of governmental overreach and corruption. Marcos and his administration might never be mentioned by name in Manila in the Claws of Light, but the film persists as a damning document of an era-specific darkness by which Brocka would eventually confess to feeling defeated. Among the 6 movies Lino Brocka directed between 1974 and 76, there were 3 landmark works that changed the course of his career and that of Philippine cinema, Wade but Found Wanting, 1974, Manila in the Claws of Light, 1975, and in Siang, 1976. They impressed local critics and, in the case of the last two films, brought the director international acclaim. The triptych was part of the outcome of Brocka's attempts at rekindling his passion for filmmaking. He had begun making commercial movies in 1970, after proving his mettle in theatre and television. He reaped box office success and prestigious awards for several melodramas and romances and a historical action film. 9 pictures and 2 years into his career, however, a row with a producer and a couple of rushed, poorly made movies prompted Brocka to go on a self-imposed hiatus. Upon returning 2 years after that, he vowed to create films that were more substantive and relevant to the national experience. "There's too much fantasy in the movies, too much escapism," he said. "Philippine films are wanting in content, they need more realism." Light, popular fare had always sustained domestic filmmaking in the Philippines, but the studio system that had ruled the industry since the 30s had gone into decline by the early 60s, when its staples dramas, comedies, adventures, and musicals influenced by Hollywood cinema and Spanish operettas called zarzuelas began to lose ground to low-budget spectacles and racy exploitation films from independent producers. Brocka's desire for change reflected the spirit of the times. President Ferdinand Marcos had imposed martial law in 1972, in a bid to remain in power indefinitely and amass a personal fortune, and was met by fierce resistance including from middle-class youth inspired by anti-establishment and anti-war uprisings in the West. Marcos had always regarded cinema, an immensely popular medium in his country, as a political battleground. During his successful first run for president, a major Philippine studio released a biopic that helped him get elected by mythologizing him as a man chosen by fate to become a brilliant lawyer and politician. Campaigning for his second term, his supporters bankrolled a movie about his wartime exploits. During martial law, 1972-81, censors banned films, meddled with scripts, and destroyed the negatives of material they deemed offensive. Censorship hindered direct representation of the political upheaval that despotism had unleashed. It narrowed the range of films that could be released, thus encouraging the escapist movie trends that Brocka abhorred: car chases, kung fu fighting, cowboys. Wade but Found Wanting, the director's return to filmmaking, follows a young man's coming of age in a community bound by superstition and prejudice. The young hero experiences first love and heartbreak, befriends outcasts, comes to comprehend the privilege his class grants him, and stands up against his sexist father. The film recalls the social criticism found in Hollywood's small-town melodramas of the 50s, as well as in Philippine prestige films about the hardships of farmers and the country's troubles after World War II, combined with the observational naturalism of 60s European art cinema. The effect wowed viewers. Bucking Philippine cinema's preference for star-driven movies, the director had cast an unknown 17-year-old actor, Christopher de Leon, in the lead role. Despite that, Wade but Found Wanting enjoyed box office success, proving that quality films with socially relevant themes could turn a profit. And Brocka's decision to steer clear of overt political content except for 2 passing references to a martial law-era curfew spared his film from censorship. Brocka's comeback picture impressed Mike de Leon, himself a budding filmmaker, whose family owned LVN, one of 4 major Philippine studios of the post-war era. De Leon offered Brocka the resources to make a film based on Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag, In the Claws of Light, a social realist novel by Edgardo Reyes that had been serialized by a mass-market literary magazine in the late 60s. De Leon acted as producer and cinematographer on the adaptation. Like Wade but Found Wanting, Manila centers on a young male protagonist played by a virtual unknown, in this case, Rafael Bimble Rocco Jr., working alongside seasoned film players as well as actors from the politically progressive theater company where the director had been working since 1967. A young village fisherman named Julio Madiaga follows his girlfriend, Ligaya Paraiso, Hilda Coronel, to Manila, where she has gone missing shortly after being recruited into domestic service. Months pass before Julio stumbles on Ligaya outside a church. A survivor of forced prostitution, she is now the kept woman of a Chinese business owner named Chuatek, or Atek, who still treats her like a prisoner despite the fact that she has just borne him a daughter. Julio persuades Ligaya to attempt an escape, despite her warning that Atek has threatened to kill her if she tries to flee. She misses their appointed meeting time. The last act in particular, with its rousing plot turns and breathtaking images, bears out Manila's international reputation as one of the finest melodramas in Asian cinema. Manila functions both as stylized reportage on the state of the city during the Marcos era and as a universal tale of life and death in a metropolis. The story Brocka is actually telling through his urban fable of star-crossed lovers is a socio-political one, about the plight of Manila's expendable working class. Julio's quest cuts a path through the various contemporary guises of slavery and the dire conditions in Manila's hovels, among other pressing indications of social inequity. The film's most moving sequences involve the exploitation and alienation of labor under capitalism. To stay in the city as he searches for Ligaya, Julio takes a job as a menial laborer at construction sites. He also turns to sex work in a moment of desperation. Brocka details Julio's exploitation in both trades. The foreman at one site pockets more than a third of Julio's wages, leaving him with barely enough to buy food, much less to secure shelter, and the conditions at the sites are hazardous, with no hard hats or safety harnesses for the workers. Julio's stint at the male brothel is far more lucrative than the construction work, but his clients' demands distress him. His only respite from the alienation is the camaraderie of his fellow workers. He discovers that he can count on his friends to share their meager provisions when he has nothing to eat, to open their homes to him, to loan him money. Julio learns a valuable lesson about hope from the solidarity of workers and the lower classes. Manila's penetrating depictions of peonage and sex work draw from the experiences of the novel's author. Edgardo Reyes spent years working at construction sites and serving as a gopher for a Chinatown brothel. The film also benefits from Reyes's lucid account of the hierarchies that operate within developing nations' rapacious economies. At the bottom of the heap, even lower than wage laborers like Julio, are the subalterns, the beggars as well as the victims of human trafficking. Above Julio are middle-class folks, who exploit the underclass with impunity. They include the foreman Balajadaya and Mrs. Cruz, the woman who lured Ligaya to the city and sold her to a brothel. Small-time capitalists such as Atek and the gay brothel owner Caesar occupy a higher social station than the petty bourgeois. The oligarchs, too high up to be visible to the underclass, fittingly appear in the film only by proxy. Throughout, images of neon lights and commercial signage suggest the culpability of such plutocrats and global capitalists for the hardscrabble existence of Manila's underclass. A sign at the construction site where Julio works bears the name La Madrid, invoking the capital of the first Western nation to turn Filipinos into vassals. When Julio enters the flesh trade, neon signs for Japanese electronics firms can be seen burning in the night sky. As with many films set in major cities, in Manila in the claws of light the Philippine capital is more than a visually appealing or symbolic backdrop. The metropolis is itself the subject of various narratives embedded within Brocka's film, including a portrayal of its social geography. Manila opens with black and white footage of the city's Chinese quarter stirring to life. At the crossing of the district's most iconic thoroughfares, Julio spends hours observing Atek's home for signs of Ligaya. He soon realizes that Chinatown, apart from being a business haven, is also a cesspool of prostitution. The film's unflattering portrayal of the ethnic enclave and especially its dwellers triggered charges of anti-Chinese racism from reviewers and the Chinese Filipino community. While Manila highlights well-known facts about the district, its stereotypical characterization of Atek and his fellow Chinese people remains a problematic element of the film. Besides Chinatown, Manila explores the heaving slums of the Tondo foreshore area, showing the housing shortage among the urban poor and the hellish living conditions of the underclass. Midway through the film, Julio is kicked off a construction site, and his fellow peon Atong takes him in. Atong and his family live in a squatters area along a polluted canal called Sunagapog, a name that means burnt lime. Later in the film, a fire reduces the settlement to smoldering debris. In a controversial episode, the film also tracks Manila's gay haunts. Brocka asked screenwriter Clodoaldo del Mundo Jr. to create the subplot, not found in Reyes's novel, depicting Julio's recourse to prostitution. The brothel scene was filmed at a gay massage parlor on the edge of Chinatown and featured real-life pimps and male sex workers in bit roles. Concerns about the running time led producers to abbreviate this episode before the film's international release. In Manila's original theatrical version, the sequence included a scene at a gay bar, some cruising and hustling inside a movie theater, and glimpses of a deepening friendship between Julio and Bobby, the guy who persuades him to try sex work. Bobby becomes infatuated with Julio and, in a moment of tenderness, steals a kiss from him. Julio punches Bobby and, driven by homophobia, ends his stint at the brothel. Had this last scene been retained, it might have established more clearly why Julio quits the lucrative sex work and settles for starvation wages as a peon. The excised scenes with their rare visual documentation of the gay demimonde were never restored to the film. Brocka embeds in his film about Manila the political upheavals of the Philippines in the 70s, with shots of posters and placards bearing slogans like "Long Live the Workers" and "Down with Imperialism and Fascism," referring to American support of the Marcos dictatorship, or an image of a raised fist and the initials of the radical organization Kabatang Makabayan, Nationalist Youth. Mindful of the dictatorship's paranoia about subversive content in movies, Brocka downplayed the film's images of social unrest as mere background that served to set the plot in the period before the dictatorship, not in the martial law era itself. This disclaimer falters in light of the fact that, although Marcos had outlawed protests, they had only grown more fervent in response to his attempts to forge the so-called New Society. The political slogans and grim social conditions Brocka attributes to the year 1970 still prevailed when the film opened in 1975, under martial law. Marcos had promised to use his powers to uplift the poorest of the working people, but the Filipino underclass only became poorer and more restive during his tenure. Fortunately, for whatever reason, Brocka's images of crippling poverty and political resistance did not bother the censors, who approved the film without cuts. The brilliance of Manila in the Claws of Light lies partly in its multiple tensions. First, gritty realism occurs alongside poised stylization. De Leon's artful cinematography unfolds in jarring contrast to the city's ugliest sights. His panoramic shots and deep space compositions emphasize the breadth, congestion, and horrid majesty of sprawling shanty towns. Tension also suffuses the sound design, in which two kinds of soundscape overlap: chatter and urban din on the one hand and, on the other, a musical score steeped in fantasy and emotion. And there is a tension within Julio's point of view, between exteriority and inwardness. Because Julio is deliriously hungry, exhausted, terrified, and hopeful, the harshness and beauty of Manila as he sees it clash and blend in unpredictable ways. Suspending itself between social expose and parable, Manila functions both as stylized reportage on the state of the city during the Marcos era and as a universal tale of life and death in a metropolis. It juxtaposes naturalistic depictions of proletarian life with moments of dreamy lyricism. For example, Julio's recollections of Ligaya in their lost paradise, a seaside village bathed in golden sunshine. The principal characters even have allegorical names. Julio Madiaga translates as Julius Patience, Ligaya Paraiso means joyful paradise, and Atek sounds like attic, Filipino slang for money. The film's plot, despite its meandering exposition and confusing flashbacks, holds together elegant patterns. Julio's descent into Manila's proletarian inferno, for instance, proceeds in 3 passages, in each of which he is guided by a male friend: Atong at the construction site, Bobby in the red light district, and Paul in Chinatown. Visual and sound motifs ripple throughout the narrative. Western pop songs portend death in various scenes. In contrast, the movie elaborates its titular metaphor fatal brightness solely through visual motifs, as when the glare in a funeral parlor emphasizes the pallor of the dead, or when the neon lights of Rizal Avenue, Manila's historic entertainment district, conjure the dream of social mobility but also point the way to ruin. Manila reaped numerous awards and fared well at the box office during its 2 domestic theatrical engagements. It enjoyed a commercial run in France and television broadcast in the United Kingdom. Before Brocka entered the scene, it was rare for Philippine art house pictures to be shown in Europe. Cinephiles in the West tend to favor the melodrama in Siang over Manila. The former is perhaps more tautly structured and more picturesque than the latter. But in Brocka's film-obsessed country, Manila in the Claws of Light is widely regarded as his magnum opus. Many films about people moving from the country to the big city detail the loss of innocence as the dream of a shining land of opportunity yields to a grim reality. Julio Madiaga, Rafael Rocco Jr., arrives in Manila with no such delusions. His eyes are already wide open to potential horror as he has come to search for his girlfriend Ligaya, Hilda Coronel, who he suspects has been lured into a sex trafficking ring. Already expecting to find a nightmare, what Julio discovers in Manila turns out to be even worse. In Manila, in the Claws of Light, 1975, director Lino Brocka, adapting, along with screenwriter Clodoaldo del Mundo Jr., a novel by Edgardo Reyes, depicts the capital city of the Philippines as a broken society designed to exploit and ultimately destroy the working class. Julio risks life and limb working in construction for 2.5 pesos a day, with his supervisor scheming almost half his wages in the process. Julio's eventual turn to the sex trade himself is entirely understandable, though it brings him just as much misery. In a country ruled by the iron-fisted martial law of dictator and kleptocrat Ferdinand Marcos, there is nowhere to turn for justice, certainly not to a corrupt police force. Constantly seeking for his lost Ligaya, Julio at least finds some sympathy from his co-workers, who Brocka depicts as generous and decent, if perhaps a bit misguided. One dreamer argues the merits of the big city over the country, observing that life might be tough here, but at least you have a chance to win the jackpot. Maybe, just maybe someday. In a sense, Julio agrees, though the only prize he cares about is Ligaya, and he will suffer any indignity as long as the chance to find and rescue her remains alive. Brocka had begun his filmmaking career directing more commercially oriented soap operas, but after a brief self-imposed hiatus, he returned to cinema with the goal of making more socially engaged work. Manila was not his first success on this front, but it provided an international breakout that established Brocka as one of the preeminent voices of Filipino cinema. Today the film is generally regarded as his masterpiece and perhaps even the greatest Filipino film of its time, though it's fair to say that the majority of Western critics making such an assessment haven't seen enough Filipino cinema to really know. Like most of Brocka's films, the low-budget Manila is usually described with terms such as realism and naturalism, which are both apt, but the film indulges in plenty of impressionistic touches, including the numerous flashbacks to Julio's nostalgia-tinged remembrances of more innocent times back home with Ligaya. The film's exquisitely rendered nighttime sequences in Manila also offer a striking visual and tonal contrast to the daytime shots, though the city is equally menacing at all times. Rocco was an amateur actor who Brocka found in a rehab center, at least according the documentary included on this disc, and his quiet, unassuming performance renders Julio a palpable and sympathetic figure, making it all the more painful to watch his grueling trudge along his own Via Dolorosa. Viewers will figure out early that the film isn't blazing a trail to a happy place, but the ending is still startling and unforgettable. Video. The film is presented in its original 1.85:1 aspect ratio. This restoration is another product of the World Cinema Project, headlined by Martin Scorsese. From the Criterion booklet, this work was restored in 2013 by the Film Development Council of the Philippines and the Cineteca de Bologna/El Imagine Retrovita Laboratory, in association with the Film Foundation's World Cinema Project, LVN, Cinema Artists Philippines, and cinematographer Mike De Leon. This restoration was funded by Doha Film Institute. Supervised by De Leon, this digital transfer was created in 4K resolution from the 35mm original camera negative. Because of color decay in the negative, De Leon guided the grading phase and validated the color using a positive print as a reference. The decayed state of the negative presented numerous challenges to restorers, but the strong final product is a testament to their hard labor. A few shots, especially in the beginning, look a bit soft and lacking in detail, but this is only an occasional problem. Colors are bright though not gaudy, and it appears that restorers resisted the urge to overcorrect any degraded elements. You see a few scratches and other signs of damage, but it all has an authentic, naturalistic look. Audio. The linear PCM mono track isn't the most robust you've ever heard, and some of the dialogue and music sounds a bit thin or tinny at times, but it's not a problem. Optional English subtitles support the Tagalog dialogue. Extras. Since this restoration is associated with the World Cinema Project, Martin Scorsese provides a brief intro, 2 minutes, about the film in Brocka. Manila. A Filipino film is a 1975 documentary, 23 minutes, by filmmaker Mike De Leon, the cinematographer on Manila. This consists of some on-set footage as well as interview with Brocka and the cast. Signed, Lino Brocka is a 1987 documentary, 83 minutes, by Christian Blackwood which consist mostly of Brocka either at work or just talking to the director about his career. He's an electric personality and it's a thrill to get to hear so much from him, especially considering Brocka would die in a car accident just 4 years later. In challenging the viewer, 19 minutes, critic and filmmaker Tony Raines discusses Brocka's early career, I had no idea he was a Mormon, and then delves into the Manila adaptation in some detail. The slim fold-out booklet includes an essay by film scholar Jose B. Capino. Final thoughts. This is the second Brocka film released by Criterion in the past few years after In Siong, 1976, was included as part of the Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project 2 box set last year. It's great to see Brocka's signature film receive a stand-alone release with ample extras to support the film. I hope many more Filipino films will join the collection in the near future. Perfumed Nightmare could sure use the deluxe treatment. Before a modern art house renaissance of Filipino cinema thanks to the international acclaim of directors like Lav Diaz and Brillante Mendoza, who have dominated the likes of Cannes, Venice, and Berlin over the past decade, Lino Brocka was the progenitor of Filipino cinema thanks to a trio of titles he unleashed in the mid-1970s. His 1976 title In Siong, which was recently restored courtesy of the Criterion Collection in their World Cinema Project Volume 2 box set, was the first film from the Philippines to premiere at Cannes in the director's fortnight. Brocka would eventually compete twice in the main competition, beginning with 1979's Jaguar. Melding elements of social realism with, sometimes, tawdry melodramatic tropes which marked the output of his early prolific output, his 1975 classic Manila in the Claws of Light, adapted from a novel by Edgardo Reyes, has all the elements of assorted film noir churned into the foreboding fatality of Greek tragedy. Young and naive village fisherman Julio Madiaga, Rafael Bimbal Rocco Jr., has left behind the desolate provinces in which he grew up to search for his love Ligaya, Hilda Coronel, in Manila. Opening in the black and white slums of the Chinese district, Julio has spent all the money he saved in the past year in his search for Ligaya. At one time, she wrote letters from a mysterious address he scopes out at night in hopes of seeing either her or the sinister woman who recruited her from the village under the ruse of work in a more lucrative domestic service. Forced to work in the back-breaking and dangerous construction agency, Julio eventually becomes a gay-for-pay sex worker after a kindly interaction with a friendly gigolo who proves even men can use their bodies to attain a room of one's own. Eventually, Julio's luck takes a turn for the better, and he stumbles upon Ligaya outside of a church. But the man who now owns her is willing to go to extreme lengths to keep her. Brocka's portrait of Manila's underbelly hinges on the inevitable poverty which defines the reality for many of its denizens, living hand-to-mouth as one character describes it. The film was made under the dictatorship of President Ferdinand Marcos, who has imposed martial law in 1972. Julio is preoccupied with his mission of finding Ligaya, and so seems to view the circumstances of his fellow colleagues, both construction and sex workers, as temporary predicaments which don't define him. In short, Julio isn't quite an active participant in the urban degradation he's experiencing. Manila isn't all bad, after all. Maybe if you had money, a co-worker explains, then the metropolis is certainly palatable. While Julio doesn't have money, he has the desire to locate Ligaya and run away with her, even if it's back to the hopelessness of the provincial life, which is depicted as another all-consuming trap people are desperate to escape. Playing like a riff on Orpheus and Eurydice, Brocka's film plays similarly to items like Paul Schrader's seminal Hardcore, 1979, or Shohei Imamura's eerie 1967 documentary A Man Vanishes, in which the director follows a man's desolate fiancée as she tries to locate the man she loves who disappeared 2 years prior. Like the revenge drama In Siang, starring Hilda Coronel, which would premiere a year later, Manila in the Claws of Night descends into genre pulp territory. What's perhaps most astonishing is Brocka's candid portrayal of a gay Filipino brothel, where poverty has led some heterosexual men to higher wages than many other opportunities in the city. On the other hand, the friendly gentleman who takes Julio under his sex worker wing reveals some choice home decor which would suggest he's lying about his heterosexuality, like a prominently displayed poster of Elizabeth Taylor in The Taming of the Shrew. Religion is also something Brocka doubles down on curiously. When Julio finally tracks down Ligaya, it's outside of a church. However, as she relates her tale of woe, they pointedly leave consecrated ground to a place they can more easily converse, which happens to be inside a movie theater playing Nicholas Ray's King of Kings, 1961, a cinematic depiction of Jesus Christ. Much like in Siang, the experiences the protagonist faces in Manila warps him beyond recognition, and Brocka tosses his once innocent hero into the bleak clutches of considerable violence. Criterion presents this new 4K digital restoration in 1.85:1 with uncompressed monaural soundtrack. Picture and sound quality are superb in this transfer, which features some expressive cinematography from DP Mike DeLeon, who supervised the restoration. Martin Scorsese introduces the title, and Criterion includes several bonus features. Director Martin Scorsese provides this 2-minute introduction, comparing Brocka to Fassbinder as far as representing a period of his country's cinema. Cinematographer Mike DeLeon made this 22-minute documentary in 1975 about the making of Manila in the Claws of Light, which features interviews with Lino Brocka and actors Hilda Coronel and Rafael Rocco Jr. Director Christian Blackwood profiled Lino Brocka in this 83-minute 1987 documentary. Filmmaker and festival programmer Tony Raines discusses Lino Brocka and the social context of Manila in the Claws of Light in this 19-minute program recorded by the Criterion Collection. A significant pillar of Filipino cinema at last recuperated, Brocka's Manila in the Claws of Light is a profoundly sympathetic melodrama cloaked in gritty neorealism. Lino Brocka's seminal 1975 masterpiece Manila in the Claws of Light offers a realistic look on the titular city while also providing a universal story on life and death in the metropolis. The film centers on Julio, played by Rafael Bimble Rocco, Jr., a young fisherman from the country who ventures into Manila in search of his sweetheart Ligaya, played by Hilda Coronel. She had been lured into prostitution disguised as the promise of a better life and education in the city, and now Julio is determined to bring her out of Manila and the hellhole it represents. But first, Julio has to work through a grossly underpaid job as a construction worker if he has to financially make it in the city, and his brief travails into gay prostitution do not help matters. Based on the novel of the same name from Edgardo Reyes, Manila in the Claws of Light owes its distinct brand of cinema verite to Italy's post-war neorealist cinema of De Sica's contemporaries. Cinematographer Mike DeLeon, who also produced the film, emphasizes the hustle and bustle of the city, with several panoramic shots and deep focus compositions that do not bother to look away from the scrappiness of the streets as well as the people in it. A diversion from the concrete mess of Manila are the quick flashback scenes from the province where Julio and Ligaya used to live, evoking a sense of nostalgia with its diverse color palette that evokes the beauty of nature. Additionally, the tension of the city is also accompanied by the equally restless soundtrack of city chatter and melodramatic strains. However, where De Sica ends Bicycle Thieves on a hopeful note, Brocka's film does not. It plays like a scene out of Dante's Inferno, only this time, the ever-imposing metropolis that is Manila pays no heed to the struggles of its otherwise hopeful occupants and sends them to their fiery despair. Julio gradually finds himself disillusioned in his quest for Ligaya, and by the film's final frames has his glimmer of hope erased by a newfound bitterness. But it's not always doom and gloom in Brocka's world. In Julio's construction gig, he finds solidarity in fellow workers who treat him as an equal and share their frustrations with their unfair boss, who pockets about a third of their salary every payday. One of them, Atong, takes Julio into his simple home in the cramped and dirty slums of the city. This sense of brotherhood comes out of the burdening weight of social inequality caused by capitalism, with Brocka providing a social commentary in the context of the Philippines being in a state of instability since President Ferdinand Marcos had declared martial law 3 years prior. The indelible image of Julio standing by the signpost at the corner of Ongpan and Misericordia streets, where he tracks down Ligaya to the Binondo district, is one of several symbols in a film rife with such symbolisms. Ongpan refers to Roman Ongpan, a longtime resistance fighter from Philippine history, while Misericordia means pity. Julio finds himself in this intersection of pity and revolt several times throughout the film, signifying his limbo on what to do when he eventually reconnects with Ligaya. Will he take pity on himself and his lover, or will he resort to rebellion to break free of the suffocating cycle that Manila represents? Manila in the Claws of Light is not without risks, however. There have been whispers of Chinese racism in the film, from the unflattering depiction of the city's Chinatown as a hotbed of prostitution to the character of Atek, played by Tommy Yap, who has a role in Ligaya's descent into the sex trade. Another point of contention is the subplot of Julio's foray into gay prostitution, not in the novel but which Brocka added to Clodoaldo del Mundo's script. While deemed unnecessary by some, it can be argued that it is a clever and indispensable way to place Julio through the ordeal that his lover Ligaya had to go through in the same trade. Owing to its title, the film explores the fatality of being drawn to the light. Julio searches for Ligaya, the joy and the light of his life, but finds himself ruined in the process. He ventures into the city, the light that supposedly brings financial stability, and faces disillusionment instead. The film's last act hammers home this realization, making Manila in the Claws of Light Brocka's magnum opus in Philippine cinema and cementing its reputation as one of the greatest films in the world. The use of repeated flashbacks fits seamlessly into the film's narrative. When the rural beauty of the island is juxtaposed with the decaying life in the city, viewers are left more shocked. While the movie can be seen as a reflection of resilience during its release period, it now serves as a medium that marks history. By blending brave social commentary with a visually rich cinematic experience, Manila in the Claws of Light remains one of the greatest Philippine movies ever. Italic. Shots from the film, Manila in the Claws of Light. Source, film screenshot Manila in the Claws of Light. The film's visual language creates a realistic feel, portraying the city as a character that appears rich and happy on the surface but is depressed in its inner layers. Cinematographer Mike De Leon employs a documentary style, which is essential in creating this sense of realism. The blend of natural lighting with long takes and static shots allows viewers to gradually immerse themselves in the film as if they are living in it. Italic. Shots from the film, Manila in the Claws of Light. Source, film screenshot Manila in the Claws of Light. The movie serves as a reflection of the harsh realities of metropolitan life, uncovering the struggles of the people beneath the tall buildings and busy streets. Whether it's the wage disparity for the same work or the individuals forced into prostitution, it reveals the gritty truths of their existence. Rather than offering solutions, the film acts as a medium to present these terrible realities to the viewers. Italic. Shots from the film, Manila in the Claws of Light. Source, film screenshot Manila in the Claws of Light. The movie begins with black and white visuals that gradually transition into color with the introduction of the protagonist. It's not just a simple shift from one shot to another, instead, the same visual transforms into color. This cinematic technique is truly fascinating, especially for that period. Julio seems captivated by the towering buildings and bustling crowds, suggesting that he is new to the environment. Filmmaker Lino Brocka masterfully engages the audience in a short amount of time, creating the impression of a compelling film from the very first visuals. Italic, the transition from black and white visuals to color source, film screenshot Manila in the claws of light. The movie follows Julio, a young fisherman from the island of Marinduque, who arrives in Manila during the 1970s. As the protagonist begins working as a poorly paid construction worker, viewers come to understand more about his life and how he arrived in the city. Through Julio's life in the city, the film explores the exploitation of the working class and the struggles of laborers. Italic. Filmmaker Lino Brocka. Source: IMDb. The 1975 film Manila in the Claws of Light has been described by many critics and cinephiles as one of the greatest Philippine movies ever. Directed by Lino Brocka, the movie is based on Edgardo M. Reyes's novel In the Claws of Brightness. This neo-noir drama